The question is not how to do better performance review, it's how to get rid, how to adapt better for this future of work, the dynamic of the market that is coming, where people will not want to be measured.
Pleasure to see you all guys back on stage here. And Tom, thanks a lot for joining. Thanks for taking the time. Maybe before we start the panel discussion, Tom, we haven't seen you on stage. I think we've seen the passion of the other people for the topic. And I know you're super passionate as well. Maybe as a starting question, Tom, why are you so passionate about this topic and why are you here to join us today?
Oh, that's not, I mean, it sounds a very simple question, but I think it's more complicated. My answer would be, my passion is that just to add on what Antoinette said, I think we're all in the wrong model. So we're all in the wrong mental box. And let's say on the one hand, I try to discuss in this kind of environment. On the other hand, I try to implement just to show that we are in the mental box. So that's perhaps why I am in the panel.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you very much, Tom. So for everyone here who's in the session, use the chat, keep the questions coming for our friends here. Maybe just to get it going, and I know you guys, I would probably rather stop you talking than actually needing to kick you. So that's amazing. Easy job for me. But maybe we kick it off. Otti, you opened the Future of Work track with a question, and that question was, how impactful are HR organizations today? And we saw lots of 8s and 9s in the chat. And then obviously my question was, well, maybe it's just because they're all HR professionals, so they're kind of obviously rating themselves positively. That's maybe the cynical look at it. So what would be the answer of you four guys here? How impactful you think HR functions are today? And maybe then also, what would need to change to be even more impactful? And Otti, maybe you want to kick it off.
I want to, firstly, it's wonderful to see everybody in this panel, and I'm especially grateful for Tom to be here because Tom has been a great inspiration, I think, for all of us in the past months since we first connected. And I think Tom's strong voice in this debate as a CEO of a challenger company is truly important in order to kind of stir up some of that provocation, maybe also to get out of that box. And maybe in the context of your question, Tim, I think so. I'm very close to HR. I feel at heart, kind of in everything that I've ever done in a corporate environment. HR and finance, we're always part of the team, right? There's no decision, no discussion has ever occurred without them. So I very strongly feel they are business partners. They are part of us. It's not us versus them. But that said, I think there's something that I've observed in the machinery of HR that over the years has sometimes made HR become part of a model that is very focused on control and on compliance, as opposed to sparking the transformation. And I think it was interesting. I listened to Dave Ulrich, who's coming up later, and he's saying now sometimes, forget about my old books. And Dave was one of the inventors of the 3-tier model of HR, right? So business partner, then people services, and the COEs. And I indeed believe there's something in that model which has caused fragmentation and made the role of the business partner especially very complex. Very often still being in the transactional activities, not always being able to get all the support from the COEs or continuously involve themselves in the upskilling they're required to keep pace with the evolution outside. So I think the role of HR has become more complex. And I'm very grateful for some colleagues at the beginning of the Congress who said, this is the time for HR to step up. And by the way, we need more resources. We need more focus. We want to become more impactful. So my personal assessment would be there's still a lot of room for HR to truly become that strategic change agent.
Whoever wants to jump in, just jump in. You don't need to wait for me to call you. You're grown up, guys. Okay, that's all right.
Okay, I'm going to say two things. First, we should abolish the word HR because it says everything, and that's one of the mental boxes I always talk about. So we talk about HR and we talk about resources. Human beings are not resources. It says everything about the way we think. And the second thing is, if we think that people are decisive, why is HR not the most important thing in the companies? Why isn't not the responsibility of the CEO, if you want to use the word CEO? I also hate the word chief if you talk about collective team approach. So our language, which is mainly an American language problem, if you see the German words for all those words, it always has been used in a different way. So it's always about department for personal stuff, personeelszaken, personaal, Abteilung, etc. But this way of American framing is at the cause of the whole problems we have created, and that's something we even don't realize anymore.
And I just kind of would add on that. I find already the term HR business partner in itself completely problematic, not just because of the HR, but also because of the business partnering. I mean, if people are the business, how can you only be a partner to the business? That's one thing. And the second thing, I think HR has all the theories, and I think they also have the heart, but they often lack the courage. So I would just love them to be more courageous, and I think that would be so important right now. I mean, easy to say for a professor, but I can tell you, even in universities, we have to change a lot. So I know a little bit about that as well.
But Antoinette, I would just comment on you, because I think it's not only universities. When we changed it like people and culture, it was so beautiful, because when we were thinking about what is the performance management that we should propose, at the moment, the people and culture team in Roche India told, okay, let us just ask everybody, because they know more. And they were brave enough to make a kind of group that were telling, and they told what you were telling. They told, if we are partners, we should not receive performance. We are partners. We maybe share what is the gain, but then we are doing together and we have a common objective. And the team was telling, we should not be paid by performance. We should not have bonus. Because if we are partners share the glories and the difficulties. Yeah, so I think that these, by the end, people want these. Many times, HR do not take a step to change their name or to quit performance because they think people need performance. No, they need to measure the result of the business. They need to measure to see what they are achieving, but they don't need to be measured. Yeah, so I think that HR is crucial, and if they understand they are also part of it. We don't want to be measured. We want to measure together. We want to achieve things together. I think this is the change of perspective that we have to take.
Really nice. Thank you, Lara. And I think there was also last HR Congress, there was a professor from Carnegie Mellon, and he basically asked the same question that I think we saw here in the tool today as well today. What is the ambition that HR people, HR professionals have? The CHRO, the CEO, whatever. And unfortunately, if you ask that same question, for example, in a finance congress, everyone's saying, my ambition is the CEO. Like there's 95% of the finance people want to become the CEO, and that's their ambition, right? Steering the company. And if you look into the HR results also here, I think there was like 50 and 70% earlier today when I looked at it who really were ambitious enough to get the CEO title. And obviously I'm with Tom, titles are just titles, but I think the ambition behind it is the interesting piece. But anyway, before we get into that too much, there was also a question earlier today, actually during the first talk from Pascal, and when Lara, you also touched on ratings there. And there's a famous book that I'm sure some of you have read from Ray Dalio called Principles, where he explains the rating system in Bridgewater, and that's probably one of the most sophisticated rating systems that you can find in any company. I don't remember how many different factors they measure, like many at least. So what are your thoughts on that? Maybe also from a scientific perspective, Antoinette, what would you say to Ray Dalio for the rating system that they have in Bridgewater?
Well, I just also wrote it into the chat platform management by intimidation. And I mean, come on. We know by now that the important things are not measurable. I think Laura has said it so nicely. The exponential potential to change is what human beings are bringing to the places, and we cannot measure the exponential potential to change. And of course, feedback in any kind, even the constructive one, is hard for people to take, and it's not helpful because it's very difficult for me to give meaningful feedback at all. So I would just say, Rocco, I wouldn't want to work there, but he probably also wouldn't hire me, so it doesn't really matter.
Nice. Other thoughts on Ray Dalio's rating system at Bridgewater from anyone?
Yeah, I can say something about it. How do you rate your children? Or your friends? Or how do you rate your friends? Or your wife? Do you have an annual reward talk with her? So it's we just don't realize that in business we are totally detached of all the other principles we find normal. So if you talk about, for instance, altruism, everybody understands that let's say our starting point always is to help others. And that's very logical, because otherwise we're not accepted by the community. We're not accepted by our families. We're not accepted by our partners. We're not accepted by our children. We're not accepted by our friends. We're not accepted in our apartment building, etc. It doesn't matter what it is. And then in business, we do exactly the opposite. Then we call shareholder value-driven strategies. Yeah. That's just egoism. Yeah. And because it just says, I take care of my own interests, and we don't care about the rest. That's why it's called human resources. So in the end, it's very simple. And if you are a CEO of a stock listed company, it's very difficult to change that, because if you would, let's say, change it, then your shareholders are calling you and say, sorry, but that's not how it works here. You're on our payroll. Perhaps we should explain you this once more. So please just kick out those people to support your listing. And I just can feel very sorry for those people. But it's not, let's say, from a scientific point of view, it's not very difficult to understand. Because in normal life, we behave exactly in a normal way and everybody understands it. And then if we enter a company, we behave in a different way. And then we try to explain each other in a very complicated way why this is normal. It's just not normal. It's also not normal to lay off people if you have a lot of money still in the bank account. Everybody understands this. So, but why do companies who behave normal always have to explain why they behave normal? I would say, let just all the other companies explain why they don't behave normal.
But there is hope. Just very quickly, sorry, and then I let it. But there is hope. I just read a very interesting article. They looked at humble leaders. And you would think a humble CEO is not very good for performance, but he is, or she is. I mean, most often it's more he, isn't it? And the reason is that then the investors are kind of saying probably the company is not a very good company, and they have like lower expectations. But of course, they then outperform the market, so the share prices is going up. So maybe in the end, it's worse to have these different types of CEOs standing to the shareholders and telling them, let's just wait a little bit. But anyway. So
what is interesting from a scientific point of view is everything, there's enough research done on that. So bonuses are counterproductive. Psychological safety has the highest output, Aristotle project. So it doesn't matter what topic you take. Companies who don't lay off their people during times of crisis have a better share holder value afterwards. So what I always find very interesting is that for all those human-centric, let's say, positions, there's enough research done on that. So, and I was always asked, those people who read Harvard Business Review, where all this research is published in, why don't they adapt it in their company? I mean, I can also give the answer as well, but it's not from a scientific point of view. There's not a huge discussion about that bonuses are counterproductive. So if there would be an enormous difference that, let's say, from a scientific point of view, it would make sense to be egoistic or to lay off people or to give, but then we would have a problem. But there is no contradiction between research and behaving in a human way.
Lara, you go ahead.
I was like, sorry, Yoti. I think that you guys told everything. The problem is that we are seeing like this. Yeah, we are seeing everything like in a scope of 2-3 years or 5 years mostly. And we are not stepping back and seeing what is happening as a history. If we would be an observer of the history is changing. And the point is that there are people that are trying to find, for example, the question is how to better or how to improve the performance review system, how to improve the motivation system. And the question is not this. The right question is, in the new way of working or the world behaving, the dynamic of the world in the next 5-10 years, what is the right way for the organizations to be set up? What is the right way for people to join organizations? Which kind of organizations people will join? Which kind of products we will buy? And by the end is what you guys told, is a question of perspective. So the question is not how to do better performance review, it's how to get rid, how to adapt better for this future of work, the dynamic of the market that is coming, where people will not want to be measured, where people want to collaborate, where people want to contribute, where people want to add value. So then the question is what you asked, Tom. So is this system, is the way that we create this problem, the way that you have to see it? So do we really, the value that we mean, what we mean by value? So by the end is everything about success. What is success for the companies, for the CEOs, for the market? If we change it, and COVID is changing this a lot. So the ones who will be able to see it and bring relevance is what you told, Tom. People will join companies that are really thinking on people and thinking on society. So the ones who will not do, they will not prevail the next 10 years. We will see this. History will tell. Sorry, Yoti.
No, absolutely. I'm thinking, I do agree, yet I think there might be another aspect to this, because Tom, you're saying in families we behave normally. So one, I'm not sure everybody's behaving normally, as in an altruistic and serving way, even in a family setting or another system. So I still believe what I've observed is there's a degree of maturity that needs to be obtained also in an organizational setting before you can kind of unleash all of the boundaries that to a degree are installed, which doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have kind of carrots and sticks, as you said on the chat. But I think there's something where the evolution of the organizational structure and process needs to be reflected in the evolution of people being able to treat each other in a way that allows reflection, allows putting these questions about how to interact and what is valuable onto the table, and like adults sit around and contract the way that they want to interact. And I think very often that is shortcut. Very often people are not taking the time to really think about how they want to work together and what they stand for. And I believe in organizations we need to create that space. I think that's one aspect that I believe is important, because more than solutions, I think we want to evolve systems so that they can take care of themselves. So we need to bring them the knowledge, we need to bring them the trust and the psychological safety, which of course is very dependent on the leaders. And I think whilst we say we're behaving normally at home, we're not behaving normally as an organization. I also think if I look at myself, very often success for me was dependent on what other people felt success was, right? The appreciation from the outside based on whatever norms society has decided is successful. And we have to, I think, liberate ourselves from that conditioning before we're able as an organizational system to move into that direction. Because as I said earlier, if my definition of success is going up the career ladder and dominate others, then whatever we do in unleashing the organizational structure is not going to be very successful because it's in my mind. Hierarchies, I believe, are very often in our own minds and not so much in the structure. What do you think?
But I don't agree on that. So I'm a historian, and in history, if you talk about political institutions, and if you would compare this with management, then in management we are just a little bit before enlightenment. So at the moment we talk a lot about servant leadership. So if you speak German, you would never say we need a strong, wir brauchen einen starken Führer, we need a strong leader. You would never say this. If you go back in history, it's always about creating checks and balances. So in history, if you talk about political science, we know it's exactly the opposite. So we need strong leader, that's aristocracy, or that is kind of dictatorship. No, we need strong balances on an institutional level, and that starts with enlightenment. So it's very interesting that all the principles we have came up to after enlightenment, after the French Revolution, it's totally different from what we're doing in management. Doesn't matter what it is. It's about radical transparency, etc. And if you talk about radical transparency management, everybody says that's very innovative, and I say no, it's not. It comes from parliamentary tradition in England, and you can just Google it, because we see as citizens it's very normal that we have access to information. In companies, it's secret. So it's, from my point of view as a historian, I just say management is 200 years behind, and it's not about strong leaders. It's about checks and balances. It's about radical transparency. It's about balance of power. And as long as you have structures like aristocracy, which create a kind of mechanisms where there is no balance of power, it's very difficult. So I think that new companies will be built, and then depending on let's say the labor market, people prefer to work for those companies, and then the other ones are forced to change. And if they don't change, they will die. And that's their last chance. But that's also depending on the economic atmosphere. So if there's a high unemployment, people perhaps would prefer to work for a more purpose-oriented organization, but they don't want to be unemployed. So what chance do they have left?
Thank you, Tom. And I think we could probably go on discussing that a bit more, and indeed we probably will in some of the context, I'm sure. I know I get killed from Mihaly if I don't finish that panel in 5 minutes, so I want to do that really. So maybe for the last 5 minutes from you four guys, I think in the different talks, we all heard many nice things and how performance management doesn't work and Ikigai and all of the other things. But what is the one call to action that you want to give here for all of the people attending and for watching online as well? So what's the one thing that you would wish for that every one of the people listening in would be doing starting tomorrow? I know, Tom, do you want to start? What's your wish for the audience?
No, I would just add to what Lara said about India, that if you just skip the whole stuff and you can show somewhere in a big company that the outcome is much better, then all those people who are very performance oriented will adapt it, not because they feel so human, but they want to have a higher performance. That would be my recommendation, with a little bit of irony. But
thank you, Tom. Antoinette, what's your call to action for the people? What's your one wish?
My one wish is that we have trust and love as core principles in our organization.
Nice. That's a pretty big wish, but we take that with us. Thank you. Lara, what's your one wish for the audience here? What's your call to action?
So I would probably inspire by what they told is what I told to my daughter yesterday night. It doesn't matter what you think people will like. It doesn't matter what you think that people will want. If you see in your heart what is the right thing, do not think in the obstacles. Start doing what you think is the right thing for your life, so you want to be remembered by it. Do what is right thing. Do not think so much on the buts, obstacle. Start doing it. just start doing it. So this would be my wish. If each one of the people who is watching just started doing what you think is right, everything will move. Don't think too much.
Thank you, Lara. Otti, what's your wish? What's your call to action for the audience here?
Well, firstly, I thought it was, again, a wonderful conversation, and thanks for everybody. I'm always learning something, and I guess my wish, I believe, change starts with ourselves. So I would suggest position yourself in front of your mirror and have a little chat with yourself. And I think the question I would suggest is, who are you really serving? Who are you really serving? What is it that life wants to live through you? What is the impact you're going to have? And once you're having that little chat, I just want to offer one piece that I love from Benjamin Zander, who once suggested in his book that he wrote with his wife, Art of Possibilities. He said, whenever with your next sentence that you say, the next move that you make, you always have a choice. You can succumb to the norms and the expectations and the conditioning that you've got, or you can be courageous and try to make someone else's life more wonderful. And I think Antoinette spoke about courage, Tom spoke about revolution. I think we have to take that courage and become that revolution and create the world as we want to see it. In our little place, in our big place, it doesn't matter, but it starts with us. So I think good luck with that in front of the mirror chat.
Thank you, Otti. I love the mirror picture as well. I think there's not really anything to add. Maybe one last thing, if we talk about revolution as well, I really like if you think about bees, because bees are the reason why actually there's life on Earth, right? Without bees, there's just no life on Earth. And the thing is, the bee has no idea about it, right? The bee's just doing their thing. She's flying from flower to flower and collects pollen, and that's it, right? And with that, everything on Earth is actually flourishing. And I think this is a really nice picture as well for everyone here in the room. Just do your thing. Make sure you do the right thing for yourself. And with that, you might change the world without even recognizing it. So that's maybe my last words here for the call to action. Thank you guys for your talks. Thanks a lot for being on the panel. It's a pleasure to be with you guys here. Thanks, Mihaly, for the invite as well. And I think with that, we have to close it here. I think you'll find all of us somewhere in the launches somewhere. And I think, Mihaly, we are back to a networking launch break.